The joke lands softly. Los Angeles, 1939. Late evening. A private suite above a downtown banquet hall, still warm from a dinner no one will publicly admit happened. The windows are cracked just enough to let in city air mixed with cigarette smoke and steam from the kitchen below. Jackets are off, ties loosened. Ice melts slowly in low glasses. Someone laughs first, not loudly, more out of habit than humor. Willie Beoff is standing near the sideboard, one hand resting on the edge like he owns it. He has already eaten. He didn't rush, he never does. His voice carries easily, not raised, not theatrical. He's telling a story that sounds like nothing. A throwaway line, a joke about how temperamental projectionists can be, how sometimes on opening night things just don't work. A light chuckle circles the room. Then Beoff adds one more sentence. Something about how easy it is for the lights to go out. Not the building lights, not the street, the screen. The laughter doesn't continue. A studio man near the window stops smiling halfway through the motion, his face freezing as if he's been caught in a photograph. Another reaches for his glass and misses it by an inch, fingers tapping wood instead. No one corrects Beoff. No one asks what he means, they already know. Beoff doesn't look at them right away, he lets the silence sit, lets it thicken. Across the room, George Brown hasn't moved. He's seated back straight, hands folded loosely, eyes down as if he's counting something invisible on the tablecloth. He doesn't need to speak. He's already spoken earlier in the evening. This part belongs to Beoff. The studio men were sent here, believing they were negotiating peace. Labor peace, that's what the invitation said. A quiet dinner, no press, no lawyers, just men talking like professionals. They were told to listen, nod, and feel things out. Louis B. Mayer wanted to know what the temperature was. That was the phrase used, temperature. But temperature implies fluctuation. This room is sealed. Beoff finally looks up. His eyes settle on one man at a time, slow, unhurried, not threatening, evaluating. The smile he wore during the joke fades, not abruptly but naturally, like a light dimmed rather than switched off. He says nothing else. That's the moment it changes. Because if he had explained, it would have been negotiable. If he had raised his voice, it would have been emotional. If he had made demands, it would have been business. But he doesn't. The silence does the work for him. Everyone in the room understands the mechanism now. It isn't fists or guns or headlines, it's schedules, crews, union cards, the quiet ability to make nothing happen on a day when everything is supposed to. Opening night, red carpets rolled out, stars waiting behind velvet ropes, reporters checking their watches. And a dark screen. No explanation, no apology, just absence. One phone call can do that. Another pause stretches too long to be comfortable. Someone clears his throat, then thinks better of it. The sound would feel like an interruption. Beoff takes a sip from his glass, sets it down carefully exactly where it was before. This isn't a threat, he says finally, almost gently. The words land wrong, not because they're false but because they're unnecessary. Threats are spoken, this is leverage. Brown looks up now, briefly, meeting the eyes of one studio representative. It's not a look of warning, it's confirmation. This is the structure, this is how things will be done. No notes are taken, no contracts are slid across the table, no demands are written down where they can be photographed later. That's the brilliance of it. Nothing illegal happens in this room. Nothing loud. Nothing that can be quoted. Yet the studio men feel something close around them, not fear exactly, containment, like realizing too late that the door you walked through doesn't have a handle on the inside. One of them tries to regain footing. He smiles, forces a casual tone, makes a remark about misunderstandings, about the value of cooperation. His voice sounds thinner than he expects. Beoff listens politely, nodding once, encouraging him to continue. Then Beoff glances, just for a second, toward the door. The conversation ends there. Not officially, but functionally. They finish their drinks, they shake hands, compliments are exchanged about the food, about the view, about the city at night. When they leave, no one mentions the joke again. They don't need to. Downstairs, the banquet hall is already being cleared, tables stripped bare, linen folded away, evidence erased. By morning, it will be just another building with offices upstairs. But something has shifted. Driving back through the city, one of the studio men stares out the window, watching marquees flash by, names in lights, dates printed weeks in advance, schedules locked, money spent. He realizes with a dull weight settling in his chest that none of it is guaranteed. Not the premieres, not the applause, not even the illusion of control. Back at the studio, Mayer will ask how it went. The answer will be careful, vague, non-committal. He'll be told the same phrase again. Temperature. But the truth is colder. Because somewhere between the joke and the silence that followed, Hollywood learned something it couldn't unlearn. Power doesn't have to announce itself. Sometimes it just reaches for the switch and lets everyone imagine the dark. The pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in. The morning after the dinner, the studios operate as usual. Phones ring, assistants move schedules forward, scripts circulate with penciled notes in the margins. No one mentions the suite above the banquet hall. No one writes anything down. That's how it survives. By midweek, small irregularities appear. A grip call goes unanswered longer than usual. A projection test is rescheduled without explanation. A soundstage supervisor mentions casually that a few men didn't show up and no one seems to know why. Nothing stops outright. Yet nothing moves cleanly either. Studio executives begin to notice the pauses, the soft friction, the way a machine that once ran smoothly now hesitates between motions. They ask questions quietly, carefully, because loud questions travel. Each answer sounds reasonable. A misunderstanding, a scheduling error, a union technicality. Those words become dangerous. Because every time they are spoken, the men who heard the joke remember the silence that followed it. They remember the way Willie Bioff stopped smiling. They remember George Brown's stillness. They begin to self-censor. One executive considers pushing back. He drafts a memo, sharp but measured, questioning labor jurisdiction on a specific production. He reads it twice, then again. On the third reading, he notices something he didn't before. His name at the top. He folds the memo and slips it into a drawer instead. Across town, George Brown is calm. He attends meetings. He shakes hands. He says little. His authority doesn't come from his voice. It comes from alignment, from the understanding that he and Bioff speak different languages but share the same sentence. And the studios feel it. A premiere date approaches. The marketing department is already committed. Billboards are up. Press kits are printed. There's no margin left for error. A studio man calls a union contact he's known for years. The conversation is friendly at first. Sports, weather, a mutual acquaintance. Then, gently, he asks about coverage for the opening night. There's a pause. Not long but deliberate. Should be fine, the contact says, unless there's confusion. Confusion. That word lands harder than any threat. Confusion can't be argued with, it can't be subpoenaed, it doesn't leave evidence. The call ends politely. The studio man sits back, staring at his desk. He feels the room tilt slightly as if gravity has shifted by a fraction. This is how control works now. Not through orders but through anticipation. In meetings, executives begin adjusting their own expectations before anyone asks them to. Budgets are reallocated, schedules padded, demands softened, not because they've been told to, but because they've learned the cost of uncertainty. Bioff doesn't call again. He doesn't need to. His power lies in absence, in the knowledge that if he wanted to, he could pick up a phone and say nothing more than a name and a date. The studios test the boundaries quietly. A minor delay here, a small refusal there, each time the response is the same. Nothing. And that nothing is heavy. A screening room stays dark for 20 minutes longer than planned. A projectionist arrives late, apologetic, flustered. The audience waits. The studio head smiles, makes a joke to cover the tension. Inside, he's counting. Minutes are messages now. Backstage, word spreads in fragments. Crew members don't know the full story, but they feel the shift. They sense which productions are safe and which ones carry risk. They adjust accordingly without being asked. Fear doesn't need instructions. It learns. Louis B. Mayer receives reports filtered through layers of caution. No one wants to alarm him, no one wants to appear incapable, so the language stays soft, diplomatic, technical. But Mayer understands tone. He reads between lines, he notices which problems recur and which don't. He hears the name Biaf mentioned once, then never again. That absence is louder than repetition. Behind closed doors, legal counsel is consulted. Options are discussed in hypotheticals. Could this be challenged? Could it be exposed? Could it be stopped? Each question circles back to the same problem. How do you fight something that hasn't happened yet? No contracts were violated, no threats recorded, no crimes witnessed. Just a joke. And the memory of a room going silent. The studios realize they aren't being attacked, they're being held in place. Frozen by the understanding that resistance will be interpreted as disrespect, and disrespect will be answered not publicly but operationally. That's the true danger. Because operations are invisible to audiences. A film that doesn't premiere doesn't make headlines, it simply disappears, careers stall quietly, momentum evaporates, blame disperses. And everyone involved pretends not to notice. Weeks pass, the pressure becomes routine, a new normal settles in. Studio heads stop asking whether the lights will go out. They start asking how to make sure they stay on. The hostage situation reveals itself fully then, not as confinement but as dependency. Hollywood doesn't need to be locked in a room. It just needs to believe the door might close. And somewhere in Lowe's Angels, Willie Biaf waits, patient, knowing that the most effective threat is the one you never have to repeat. The realization doesn't arrive with a crisis. It arrives with relief. A premiere goes smoothly, the lights come up on time, applause lands where it's supposed to, reporters file their copy. The machine breathes again. Somewhere between the opening credits and the curtain call, a studio head exhales without realizing he'd been holding his breath. And that's when the truth becomes unavoidable. Nothing had been fixed. It had only been permitted. The studios begin to understand what they agreed to without signing. Stability now depends on alignment, peace depends on predictability, and predictability depends on not surprising the wrong people. The power arrangement settles into place quietly, like furniture that's been moved while everyone slept. Willie Biaf doesn't need to be present anymore. His role was never to manage, it was to establish a condition. After that, the system maintains itself. Executives adjust decisions upstream. They pre-comply, they shape proposals so they won't trigger resistance they can't see. Fear becomes administrative. Years later, when investigators try to reconstruct how this happened, they struggle. There are no transcripts of that dinner, no recordings, no witnesses willing to describe the moment accurately because describing it means admitting how easily it worked. When Biaf is eventually exposed and arrested, headlines focus on numbers, on extortion, on corruption, on sentences and prison terms. The story is framed as resolution. But inside the studios, something remains unchanged. Because the lesson wasn't about Biaf. It was about the vulnerability he revealed. Hollywood learned that its power was theatrical, that its authority depended on uninterrupted performance, that stopping the show, even briefly, could do more damage than public scandal. Executives who lived through that period carry the memory forward. They don't talk about it directly, they encode it into habits, into redundancies, into the instinct to avoid confrontation when timing is delicate. A younger executive years later asks why a particular decision was made. The answer is vague. It's not the right moment. There are complications. Let's not invite trouble. Trouble. The word still does the work silence once did. The industry moves on, names change, structures shift, but the mechanism remains: power that doesn't announce itself, control that hides inside logistics, fear that never needs to raise its voice again. Looking back, that joke about turning off the lights doesn't stand out in transcripts or biographies. It isn't quoted in textbooks. It doesn't appear in celebratory histories of Hollywood's golden age. That's because its impact can't be captured in words. It lives in pauses, in softened demands, in choices made early to avoid consequences later. The studio heads were never dragged anywhere, never publicly humiliated, never forced to kneel. They simply learned where the switch was. And once you know that, you don't need to be threatened. You regulate yourself. That's the haunting part. The lights didn't go out that night. They didn't need to. Because everyone in the room left knowing exactly how dark it could get and who would decide. The story doesn't end with Biaf's conviction or Brown's decline or Mayer's eventual departure from power. Those are footnotes, endings we prefer because they feel clean. But the real ending is quieter. It's the next meeting, the next premiere, the next decision made with an invisible audience in mind. A room where no one jokes anymore. Because they remember the last time someone did. And how the silence that followed changed everything.